Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi, Herman and Corin. So we've talked about the Iran-Israel-US threat a lot in recent episodes, and it's something that is front and center in international news at the moment. We've looked at the potential for nuclear warfare in the region. We talked about the Iranian ballistic missile arsenal and which of those could be potentially nuclearized. And when we talk about the nuclear threat from Iran, one word that caught my attention and I thought would be worth talking about in greater detail is threshold. We talk about nuclear threshold states and levels of enrichment that are and can be associated with peaceful use of nuclear technology for energy production and for research, and for much higher levels of enrichment that almost scream that this country is on its way towards enriching it for use in weapon systems. In the case of Iran, where we have this kind of strange dance with the IAEA, which we can only assume to be a bit of a world of subterfuge at the best of times, that Iran is showing the inspectors what they want to see. We've talked about how sophisticated decoys are in the modern era. We're no longer blowing up inflatable tanks, but deception and decoy in the world of 2026 has taken on a vastly more sophisticated tradecraft. So, Herman and Corin, what I'd love to chat about today is this concept of the nuclear threshold and the window of opportunity. A few days ago, David McCloskey, a former CIA analyst, was interviewed by the Forecast podcast. The remarks were on January the 29th. And he talked about this window of opportunity regarding Iran. And that's often where the debate gets left, because the concept of a window of opportunity is a bit nebulous. Does that mean we're talking about potentially days, weeks, months, quarters? You know, it all depends, I guess, on where exactly Iran is assessed to be and what their rate of progress is. So Herman and Corin, I'd love to chat today about what that concept is understood to meant. And even though, as in many episodes, we make the disclaimer that we're not going to pull back the curtain on current intelligence assessments, nobody is able to do that. What we can do is make some informed assessments based on what we do know and have been told about what those rates look like, to understand exactly what the calculus might credibly look like at the moment in planning the operation.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. We are coming to you from Jerusalem, where the weather is finally starting to feel like spring, even if the geopolitical climate is feeling a bit more like a pressure cooker. It is February 20th, 2026, and the air here has a certain heaviness to it that is hard to describe if you are not on the ground. I am Corn, and I am here with my brother, the man who reads nuclear physics papers for fun while I am trying to sleep.
Herman Poppleberry at your service. And yeah, Corn, you are right about that pressure cooker. It feels like every time we sit down to record lately, the headlines regarding Iran and the regional security situation have shifted another notch toward the red zone. We have seen the missile exchanges of the last 2 years, the shifts in leadership in Tehran after the 2024 helicopter crash, and the steady, quiet hum of centrifuges that never seems to stop. It is a tense time to be an analyst, and an even tenser time to be a resident of this region.
It is definitely front and center for us. Today's prompt comes from Daniel, and it is a heavy one. It cuts right through the noise of the daily news cycle and gets into the existential mechanics of the Middle East. Daniel wants us to dig into the concept of the nuclear threshold and this idea of a window of opportunity, specifically in the context of Iran. He mentioned a recent interview with former Central Intelligence Agency analyst David McCloskey on the Forecast podcast, where they discuss this exact window. It is a term we hear a lot in the briefing rooms and on the news, but as Daniel points out, it can be pretty nebulous. Is it days? Is it months? Is it a theoretical concept or a tactical reality? And what does it actually mean for the people who have to make the hard decisions in the bunkers?
It is a brilliant prompt because the threshold is not just a technical measurement. It is not just a number on a dial. It is a psychological, political, and strategic reality. When we talk about a nuclear threshold state, we are talking about a country that has acquired all the necessary components, the fissile material, the specialized technology, the delivery systems, and the scientific expertise to assemble a nuclear weapon, but has made a calculated strategic choice not to cross that final line. At least, not in a way that is visible to the world. They are essentially a nuclear power in every way except for the final assembly and the test.
Right, and that choice is often the most fragile part of the whole equation. It is a state of being that relies on the world believing you can do it, while you benefit from the fact that you haven't done it yet. But before we get into the window of opportunity, let us establish the baseline for our listeners. We talk about enrichment all the time, but I think people get lost in the percentages. When we talk about enrichment levels, what are we actually looking at?
We are looking at the concentration of the isotope uranium-235. Natural uranium, the stuff you dig out of the ground, is mostly uranium-238, about 99.3%. But uranium-238 is stable. It is not what you want for a chain reaction. You need uranium-235, which makes up only about 0.7% of natural ore. To get a bomb, or even a power plant to work, you have to increase that concentration. You do that by turning the uranium into a gas uranium hexafluoride and spinning it in centrifuges at incredible speeds. The heavier 238 isotopes move to the walls, and the lighter 235 isotopes stay in the center.
And this is where the math gets counterintuitive. For peaceful nuclear energy, like what you find in most civilian power plants, you are looking at enrichment levels around 3 to 5%. If you want to run a specialized research reactor, maybe for medical isotopes, you go up to 20%. That is often called low-enriched uranium, or LEU. But once you hit 60%, you are in a very different territory. That is highly enriched uranium, or HEU. And here is the kicker: the jump from 60% to 90%, which is considered weapons grade, is actually much smaller in terms of effort than the jump from 5% to 60%.
Exactly. This is the concept of separative work units, or SWUs. Think of it like a massive filtering process. To get from natural uranium to 5%, you have to remove a massive amount of the unwanted uranium-238. By the time you reach 60%, you have already done about 95 to 99% of the work required to get to 90%. You have already discarded almost all the junk.
That is the part that always trips people up. It feels like 60 to 90 is a huge leap. It is 30 percentage points, but the physics of it means most of the work is already done. It is like running a marathon, where the first 24 miles take hours because you are carrying a heavy backpack. But the last 2 miles take minutes because you have dropped the bag, and you are sprinting downhill with all that built-up momentum.
That is a perfect analogy. By the time Iran reached 60% enrichment, which they have been doing at sites like Natanz and Fordow for years now, they were essentially at the doorstep. They have removed the bulk of the material they do not need. They are standing on the rug, their hand is on the doorknob, and they are just waiting to decide if they want to turn it. As of early 2026, the estimate suggests they have enough 60% material that, if they decided to enrich it further, they could have enough for several nuclear devices in a very short order.
So let us talk about this window of opportunity that David McCloskey was discussing. If the threshold is the door, the window of opportunity is the time frame in which an outside power, like the United States or Israel, could actually do something to stop them from turning that knob. Daniel asked if this means days, weeks, or months. Herman, from your research into the technical rates of progress and the current state of Iranian centrifuge technology, how do we define that window today?
It is a moving target, which is what makes it so terrifying for military planners and intelligence analysts. In the past, during the era of the JCPOA, we used to talk about breakout time in terms of months or even a full year. The goal of diplomacy back then was to keep that window wide enough so that if Iran started to cheat, the international community would have plenty of time to detect it, debate it at the UN, and take action. But today, the estimates are much, much shorter. If Iran decided to dash for 90% enrichment today, Many experts believe they could produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a single device in a matter of days. Some say as little as 7 to 10 days.
A week? Herman, that is incredibly fast. That barely leaves time for a diplomatic cable to be sent and acknowledged, let alone for a carrier strike group to move into position, or for a complex military operation to be authorized and executed. If the window is only a week wide, the traditional model of international pressure is essentially dead.
Precisely. And that is just for the fissile material. This is where we have to be careful with our definitions. Producing the weapons-grade gas is one thing, but you also need to weaponize it. You need to turn that gas into a metal pit, which is a very specific and difficult metallurgical process. You need to design the conventional explosives, the high explosive lenses that trigger the implosion. You need a neutron initiator to start the chain reaction at the exact microsecond of maximum compression. And then you have to miniaturize the whole thing to fit inside the nose cone of a missile.
This is where the debate gets interesting, and where McCloskey's insights are so valuable. Some analysts argue that even if they have the uranium, the weaponization takes longer, maybe 6 months to a year. They argue that Iran hasn't mastered the integration yet, but others point out that we might not have perfect visibility into their weaponization progress. We are looking at a black box.
And that brings us to the deception and decoys Daniel mentioned. We are not just talking about wooden tanks or painted runways anymore. In 2026, the level of Iranian subterfuge is staggering. We know they have built massive underground facilities like Fordow, which is buried deep inside a mountain near Qom. It is designed to be impervious to almost any conventional bunker buster in the world. But beyond the physical hardening, they are using sophisticated denial and deception, D&D, to hide their actual progress.
I was reading about the sanitized sites. If the intelligence community gets a tip that research into, say, explosive triggers is happening at a specific warehouse in a Tehran suburb, the Iranians have become incredibly fast at cleaning it. By the time an IAEA inspection is negotiated and the inspectors actually arrive, the Iranians can strip the building to the studs, replace the soil underneath the floor to remove any chemical or radioactive traces, and repaint the walls. They have turned site sanitation into a high-speed art form.
They have, indeed. And Daniel mentioned sophisticated decoys. We are seeing reports of electronic emitters used to mimic the heat signature or the power consumption of a centrifuge cascade. Imagine you are a satellite analyst looking at a facility. You see the thermal output you expect from 1,000 centrifuges spinning at 60,000 RPMs. You think you know what is happening. But in reality, that facility is a shell, and the real work is happening in a smaller, nondescript building nearby that looks like a carpet factory or a water treatment plant. This creates a massive intelligence challenge. If you are a planner in the United States or Israel, you are looking at a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half might be fakes designed to lead you into a trap.
So, if the window of opportunity is the time we have to act, and the breakout time for the material is potentially down to days, the calculus for an operation becomes incredibly compressed. David McCloskey mentioned that the debate often gets left in a nebulous place because we do not know the exact rate of progress. But let us try to look at what that calculus looks like right now on the whiteboard of a general or a prime minister. What are the variables?
The first variable is certainty of intelligence. This is the biggest hurdle. Do we know where all the material is? If you strike 5 known facilities, but they have a 6th one hidden in a mountain that you did not know about, you have started a regional war without actually solving the nuclear problem. In fact, you might have just given them the ultimate excuse to go full speed toward a weapon with whatever material they have left. You strike, you miss the core, and they use the smoke as cover to finish the job.
That is the nightmare scenario. You hit them, you fail to stop the program, and now they have no reason to hold back. The diplomatic path is gone, the threshold is shattered, and they go for the bomb as a matter of survival.
Exactly. The second variable is the kinetic versus non-kinetic approach. We have seen what cyber attacks can do. Everyone remembers the Stuxnet virus from 15 years ago, which physically destroyed Iranian centrifuges by making them spin out of control while reporting that everything was normal. But the Iranians are not the same people they were in 2010. They have hardened their networks. They have their own sophisticated cyber units that have attacked infrastructure globally. So, do you go with a surgical strike, which is loud and starts a war? Or do you use sabotage? Or do you try to take out the key scientists? Each of these has a different timeline and a different risk profile.
And the window of opportunity is also defined by the Iranian response. They are not passive players. If they know that we are watching them closely, they might wait for a moment of global distraction. We saw this in 2024 and 25. They look for when the US is bogged down in a domestic political crisis, or when there is a major conflict in another theater, like Eastern Europe or the Pacific. They are looking for their own window, where the international community is too paralyzed to respond effectively.
That is a great point. The window is not just about the physics of uranium, it is about the politics of willpower. McCloskey often talks about the Iranian strategy of incrementalism. They push the envelope just a little bit at a time. They enrich to 60%. The world grumbles, passes a resolution, but does nothing. They install more advanced centrifuges, the IR6 or even the IR9 models, which are much more efficient than the old IR ones. Again, a few headlines, but no real consequence. They are slowly moving the threshold closer and closer until the gap between being a non-nuclear state and a nuclear state is so small that it can be crossed in a single night.
It is the boiling frog metaphor. By the time the world realizes the water is boiling, it is too late to jump out. So, if we are looking at the current rates of progress in 2026, and we know they have these advanced centrifuges, the IR9 is supposedly 10 to 20 times more powerful than the original models. What does that do to the planning for an operation?
It means that any operation has to be preemptive. If you wait until you have definitive 100% proof that they are enriching to 90%, you have probably already missed the window. The detection time. The time it takes for the IAEA sensors to see the change, for the inspectors to verify it, for the report to be written, and for governments to verify that report could easily exceed the time it takes for Iran to finish the enrichment. We're talking about a situation where the flash to bang is shorter than the bureaucratic process of the United Nations.
So the decision to act has to be based on indicators and warnings rather than hard proof. That is a very dangerous place for a leader to be. It reminds me of the intelligence failures leading up to the Iraq War in 2003, but in reverse. If you act on a suspicion and you are wrong, you have started a regional catastrophe for no reason. If you wait for proof and you are right, you have a nuclear-armed Iran and the window is closed forever.
And that is why the term threshold state is so significant. It allows Iran to have the deterrent power of a nuclear weapon without actually having the weapon. They can say to the world, we can do this whenever we want, so you better treat us with the respect of a nuclear power. It gives them immense leverage in negotiations and regional power struggles. They can project power through their proxies. Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq, knowing that an escalatory response against Iran itself carries the risk of them crossing that final threshold.
Let us go deeper into the weaponization piece, because that is often the black box Daniel was asking about. While we cannot reveal current classified assessments, we can make informed guesses based on history. We know about the Ahmad Plan from the late 90s and early 2000s, which was their original secret program to build a warhead. The Israeli intelligence raid on the Tehran archives in 2018 revealed just how much work they had already done. They had designs for a warhead. They had done testing on high-explosive triggers at sites like Parchin. If they were that far along 20 years ago, how much of that knowledge has been preserved?
Knowledge does not evaporate. The scientists who worked on the Ahmad Plan are still around, or they have trained a new generation of physicists and engineers. They have access to much more powerful computing now for simulations. In 2026, you do not necessarily need to do a full-scale North Korean-style underground nuclear test to know if your design will work. You can do subcritical tests or use advanced modeling to be reasonably certain that the physics package will fire.
So the window of opportunity might not even be about the enrichment anymore. It might be about stopping the integration of a warhead onto a missile. We know their ballistic missile program is the most advanced in the Middle East. We saw their capabilities during the missile exchanges over the last year. They have the range, they have the accuracy, and they have the volume. If they can put a nuclear payload on something like a Fatah, 2 hypersonic missile, the window of opportunity to intercept that becomes almost zero.
Exactly. A hypersonic delivery system combined with a nuclear warhead is the ultimate game changer. It bypasses most traditional missile defense systems because of its speed and maneuverability. This is why the planning for an operation is so focused on the enrichment sites right now. Because once that material is out of the centrifuges and into a warhead, the target becomes mobile. It goes on a truck, it goes into a hidden silo, it goes into a tunnel in the Zagros Mountains. You can no longer just bomb a single facility and solve the problem. You are chasing ghosts.
So, the window of opportunity is effectively the period before the material is moved from a known, fixed location, like the halls of Natanz, to a secret, mobile one.
That is exactly how a military planner would see it. Once the material is weaponized and dispersed, the problem transitions from a counter-proliferation mission to a nuclear deterrence mission. And that is a very different and much more permanent reality. It is the difference between a surgical strike and a Cold War-style standoff.
I want to go back to the role of the IAEA. They are often criticized for being too slow or too bureaucratic, but they are the only eyes we have on the ground. If Iran were to truly kick them out, would that be the ultimate indicator that the window is closing?
Most analysts would say yes. If Iran expels the inspectors or removes the remaining monitoring equipment, the cameras and the electronic seals, that is the clearest signal that they are about to make a break for it. It is the equivalent of a thief cutting the security cameras before the heist. But even then, the Iranians are smart. They might not kick them out entirely. They might just create enough administrative friction that the inspections become meaningless. They could say, oh, we have a technical glitch with the cameras, or there is a security lockdown in this province so you cannot travel there this week.
It is the death by a thousand cuts approach to transparency. You keep the inspectors there so you can claim you are cooperating, but you make sure they never see anything important.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the centrifuges keep spinning. One thing that McCloskey mentioned, which I think is vital to understand, is the psychological state of the Iranian leadership. They have watched what happened to countries like Libya, which gave up its nuclear program in 2003 and then saw its regime toppled years later. And they see North Korea, which has nuclear weapons and is treated as a major player on the world stage despite its economic isolation. From their perspective, the threshold is the only thing keeping them safe from regime change.
It is a rational, if cynical, calculus. If you believe the world is out to get you, a nuclear deterrent is the ultimate insurance policy. But for us living here in Jerusalem, that insurance policy looks like an existential threat. The concept of the window of opportunity is not just an academic debate for people here. It is about whether or not we will be living under a nuclear shadow for the next 50 years. It changes everything. How we respond to Hezbollah, how we conduct diplomacy, how we think about the future of our kids.
And that brings us to the practical takeaways for our listeners. When you hear these terms in the news, like threshold or breakout time, do not think of them as static numbers. Think of them as part of a dynamic, high-stakes game of poker where the players are constantly trying to bluff each other. The window of opportunity is shrinking because the technology is getting better. The deception is getting more sophisticated, and the political will to stop it is being tested every single day.
One of the things that really struck me from the McCloskey interview was the idea that we might already be in a post-window world and just not know it yet. If they have already mastered the weaponization in secret, and they have enough material for a few bombs hidden away in a location we haven't identified, then the operation we are talking about might already be obsolete.
That is the most sobering thought of all. If the intelligence is lagging behind the reality, then the window is already closed and we are just walking through the frame. But most Western and Israeli intelligence agencies still believe there is a slim window left. The question is what they are willing to risk to use it. A strike on Iran would almost certainly trigger a massive regional war. You have Hezbollah in Lebanon with 150,000 rockets, you have the militias in Iraq and Syria, you have the Houthis. You are weighing a certain war today against the possibility of a nuclear-armed adversary tomorrow.
It is the definition of a no-win scenario. But that is why these assessments of rates of progress and enrichment levels are so critical. They are the only data points we have to try to navigate this. Herman, what should people be looking for in the next few months to see which way this is tilting?
Watch the IAEA quarterly reports very closely. Look for mentions of the stock of 60% enriched uranium. If that stock starts to decrease without a clear explanation of it being downblended or turned into medical targets, it might mean it is being moved for further enrichment. Also, watch for any changes in the status of the inspectors. If Iran starts de-designating more inspectors, that is a bad sign. And finally, keep an eye on the rhetoric from both Tehran and Jerusalem. When the talk of red lines becomes more frequent and more specific, it usually means the window is getting very small.
It is a lot to process, and it is definitely one of the more serious topics we have covered. But understanding these concepts, the threshold, the breakout time, the deception, it helps us see past the headlines. It gives us a framework for understanding why the world is so on edge right now. It is not just about a percentage of uranium, it is about the time we have left to decide what kind of world we want to live in.
Absolutely. And I think Daniel's prompt really hit the nail on the head by focusing on that word nebulous. These concepts are designed to be a bit blurry because that blurriness gives everyone room to maneuver. Iran can maneuver, the US can maneuver, Israel can maneuver. But at some point, the physics takes over and the blurriness disappears. You either have a weapon or you don't.
Well, I think we have certainly gone deep into the weeds on this one. It is a complex, terrifying, and fascinating subject. And it is a reminder of why we do this show. To take these big, scary ideas and try to break them down into something we can understand, even if the answers aren't always comforting.
Exactly. We are trying to shine a little light into the dark corners of the world, even if what we find there is a bit unsettling. Knowledge is the only thing that keeps the panic at bay.
Before we wrap up, I want to say that if you are enjoying the show, or even if you are just finding it useful for navigating these crazy times, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show, and we love hearing from our listeners. Daniel, thanks again for the prompt. It was exactly what we needed to talk about today.
Yeah, it really does make a difference for a show like ours. We appreciate the support more than we can say, and keep those prompts coming. We might not get to all of them, but we read every single one.
You can find all our past episodes, all 711 of them now, at myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there if you want to subscribe directly, and there's a contact form if you want to reach out to us. You can also email the show at show@myweirdprompts.com.
We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much anywhere else you get your audio fix.
Thanks again to Daniel for sending in this prompt. It gave us a lot to chew on today. We hope this gave you all some valuable perspective on what is happening in the world right now. It is a heavy topic, but it is one we cannot afford to ignore.
Definitely. Stay curious, stay informed, and we will talk to you next time.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye from Jerusalem.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.